All right. Let's see who can remember anything. What was the right listed in the Bill of Rights that William and Mary signed as they came to the throne? Yes. Good guess. Hope you're a quiz one as well. This is 1689. It was signed after the Habeas Corpus Act and Petition of Right and Magna Carta. I think I just gave you a listing of things rather than read through the document. And you're welcome to read them off of your notes.
The right to petition the government is guaranteed.
You stole Josh's. He already said that, but that's okay. You said it with more fervor and conviction. He asked it was kind of a question for him. Yes. Go ahead.
The king couldn't ignore the acts of Parliament.
Okay, couldn't ignore the acts of Parliament. No taxation without the consent of Parliament. No army in time of peace without the permission of Parliament. Freedom of speech and debate in Parliament, etc. So some things that hopefully sound familiar to us, they were making William and Mary agree to as they came to the throne here. All right, then we got to the Mayflower Compact. Somebody tell me, what government structure did the Mayflower Compact set up? Serenity's smiling. Sarah?
It didn't set one up.
It did. Yeah, all it just said was they were going to set one up when they landed, and they would listen to it. That's all. It didn't describe any type of government structure. The Fundamental Orders of Connecticut did. It talked about the nuts and bolts and mechanics of how to operate a colonial government. All right, then we got to a little bit from the colonial government there. Which house was more powerful, the upper or the lower? Lower. And which group of people did that represent? Lower people? The poor, the common classes. The upper house, intentionally very aristocratic, and the wealthy. Then talked about the governors and how they had a lot of power, especially on paper, but the lower house in many, many cases was able to hold the upper hand. And why was that? Christina raised your hand early. I'll let you answer this one, but don't know? Okay.
They could decide on the budget for the...
Yeah, they controlled the purse strings. They controlled the money. All right. The Constitution is, I think, a very amazing document, and a lot of it, they went back and looked at some very good things through history and some very good biblical ideas, but they had run governments. Right? They had learned how powers like controlling money and spending, taxing and spending, how much you can use that. So they were experienced at really using the powers of certain positions to torque other parts of the government to do what they wanted. So as they put the Constitution together, it wasn't just this exercise of, it wasn't just this mental exercise where they thought it would work pretty good. They had actually done things like this before, so they had some experience going into it. If you don't actually have any real-world experience, communism sounds pretty good, right? But when you actually go and try to implement it, it's a complete disaster, right? They weren't doing that. They had some real-world experience, and there's a good example of where their members of the Constitutional Convention had been in the lower house, and they had used this power, so they were familiar with how the different branches could check each other and balance them out. All right, then we looked at the Bill of Rights and then the Declaration of Independence. Somebody review for us from the Declaration the 4 points of political theory. The first part of that document, the second paragraph of it, they lay out the case, the theoretical, the philosophical case to justify them separating from England. We split up into 4 points. If you're too shy to do all 4, I'll let you do one, but...
All men are created equal for God.
Okay.
All men are given rights from God, and the government was created. Was created to protect these rights.
Okay.
And the government destroys his rights, and when when the government destroys the right, change destroys the rights of the people, the change becomes necessary.
It's time to change, right? So create equal before God, rights from God, government created to protect those rights, not to give them or bestow them, just recognize them and protect them. And then when the government begins to take those away, it's time to do something. Not always armed revolution, but in this case, that is what it had gotten to. So they had tried other things beforehand. If you're familiar with American history at all, they had petitioned, they had tried multiple times to change this before. Any sane man isn't excited about going into combat. I mean, there are some people that are, and they're a little bit off kilter, I think. So and that's not our first option. Barack Obama violated the Constitution. Lock and load and storm D.C. this afternoon. That shouldn't be our first response. We should do other things, and hopefully it doesn't come to that point. For them, it came to that point where the only option was to defend themselves against a tyrannical government. All right, then we read parts of the Declaration. Read through that part where they lay out that political justification, the philosophical justification. Read a little bit of the injuries, a long listing. The bulk of the document, the middle, is just a listing of all the things that the king or the king and parliament had done. And then we get to the end where they declare they're independent. All right, that finally comes at the end. And then everybody signs it. And it's really easy to not appreciate what that meant. All right. I don't know, imagine if I came in here next Tuesday, and I had this document, us signing in blood that, like the guys did with Paul, we're not going to eat until the president is dead, and I'm asking you to sign this. You think, wait a second, I might go to jail for that. And then Shem comes up and says, I want to make sure he can read mine without his glasses, so Shem writes real big. It's easy to not appreciate what this meant. When these guys signed this thing, right? Hopefully you're thinking about me getting a group together to assassinate the president. You're thinking, wow, there's just a few of us here. This isn't going to get off the ground. We're just all going to go to jail. And those guys would have had those same thoughts. Wow, it's just us. No one's going to follow. They would have had those same thoughts. And it was a very gutsy move to step out and sign these things. And many of them paid very dearly for doing this. Okay, questions about that part of the Declaration? Don't worry about next Tuesday. I have no plans to come in with that. So, all right. I think we stopped right there. Is that okay? The next thing I want to do is list some of the. Maybe I should come up with a better term. I just mentioned the political theory that the Declaration lays out, justifying this split from England. The next point I have, we have that outline with that in it. The next main point I have, separate from the outline, is that the Declaration also sets out the philosophical foundation for our country. It kind of describes this ideal situation. This is what we want. This is what we believe. It sets that philosophical foundation. I'm going to give you a few points in here. Now, these are... There's some similarity to the political theory up above, but I think it's worth thinking about this as a separate idea. This idea that the Declaration sets forth this philosophical foundation. The Constitution was an attempt to create a government structure that met that philosophical foundation. It was flawed. Right? Can anybody think of the one major flaw in the Constitution that doesn't jive with this idea that all men are created equal? Devontae or Shem, do you want to tell us? What part of the Constitution doesn't fit with the statement in the Declaration that all men are created equal?
Forever body isn't counted as the person.
Slavery? No.
The slavery, it allowed for slavery, which, it's hard to argue that slaves and non-slaves are equal. Right? So anyway, it was flawed. All right, that doesn't mean we throw the whole thing out. We could look at you and find flaws, and we still let you come to class and be part of our school. But the Declaration, it sets out this philosophical foundation, and the Constitution was an attempt to create a government that lived up to that thing. And that is one of the most glaring flaws. And we experience a relatively minor event in American history to correct that flaw in the Constitution, the Civil War. So. Oh.
I was observing your daughter's class, math, and they went over the...
Which daughter?
Honey, Olivia.
Okay.
And Mrs. Bain asked when Abe Lincoln was president, and like during what war? She said World War II.
All right, I got to talk to Olivia. Wow. We have warped children around here. She also, one of her teachers was talking about getting stuck in traffic coming to school. And she said, "You live in Illinois?" The only time she sees traffic is when we candy sell in Illinois. You live in Illinois? Anyway, so she's warped. Well, all right. Philosophical foundation. How do we get to that? Thank you, Sarah. All right, let me give you another term with this philosophical foundation, then we'll list some of the things there. If you wanted to give a just kind of a general name for the philosophical foundation, it would be the idea of natural law. That is the historical name for this natural law. It is derided and made fun of, and liberals hate the idea of natural law. Basically, natural law means there's a natural order and way things should operate and be done because God created us that way. I mean, there are natural laws in nature. You know, you throw an apple up in the air and it's going to come to the ground, and we don't stand around and act surprised. Wow, fell to the ground. And there are laws like that about how people live and operate, and how government structure should operate, and what they should do and what they shouldn't do, and why people go to work and why they go to all the trouble to have a job. That they're natural laws, and the government should recognize those and organize itself along those lines rather than against them. Okay, one good example, or at least I think easy to see example, is our welfare system. All right, just be very base here, base not in the sense of evil, but down to just the basic level. Why do you go to work?
The Bible says he who doesn't work shouldn't eat.
And you like to. You like to eat. Right? We like to be able to eat. We want to have heat in our house. We want some of those basic things, so we have to go to work to get those. Well, the government's set up a system where you don't have to work to get those things. And we're lazy sinners, and we think, well, I could go to work 8 hours a day and get some food, or I could stay home and get better food. And many people choose this. All right? It goes against natural law. It doesn't recognize the nature of man as God created us. So natural law is hated by liberals today, made fun of. People coming up to be nominated to the Supreme Court, some liberals would ask some derogatory questions about whether or not they believe in natural law. Every now and then one will say, "Yeah, I do." How can we forget that God made it? That it's refreshing to hear that every now and then. But anyway, that would, if you had to give one term to kind of describe the political ideology of the founding, it would be that idea of natural law. So let me give you a couple of points here about what this philosophical foundation is, or this natural law idea. All right, first, and I think first and fundamental to it is that all men are created equal by God. All right, we saw that stated explicitly in the Declaration. Created equal by God. The current, at the time of the Declaration, idea that they were fighting against was the divine right of kings. Anybody know what that is? Yeah, there's certain people that God just, have special power and authority from God to be the ruler. Now, I'm not saying, God does talk about in the Bible appointing the rulers and they're His emissaries for our good and that type of thing. I'm not talking about that. But there's certain people that, they're just divinely different and should be the king. All right? That was the philosophy of King James and others. They were rulers because God gave them special power. So as opposed to that, we're all created equal. Right. I heard a good example once from the animal kingdom. The guy was talking about this very point. He said, amongst people, there's no queen bee. If you think about a beehive, the queen bee is bigger and it's created different. You can look at it and say, well, there's the leader. There's not a queen bee. There are people that are bigger than others, but we don't automatically make them the rulers. So created equal by God. All right, the next point. All these people that are created equal have the right to life. You have the right to live. The government can't just arbitrarily kill you. Other people can arbitrarily kill you. Under the right circumstances, we can kill you, but not arbitrarily. So, yes.
Are they trying to argue constitutionally that it's your right to kill yourself with the whole euthanasia thing that's going on? Because I know more states are legalizing that.
I'm not really, it wouldn't surprise me that they're trying to argue that that's, if you can get to, there's some really, if you get into reading Supreme Court decisions, there's some really funny things the Supreme Court says. And if you're willing to accept that, then sure, the Constitution says you can kill yourself. It doesn't say anything about abortion, but somehow there's this, not just something we should allow, a constitutional right to an abortion.
Right of privacy.
Yeah. We will talk about that later, but the argument basically is there's this shadow, which we don't have any good shadows here. The Bill of Rights casts this shadow, and on the edges of that shadow is the right to privacy. And then they say that's one leap of faith, and then the next leap of faith is that includes the right to an abortion. There we go. There we have that is the heart of the argument in Roe v. Wade. So anyway, if you can swallow that, then you can swallow that you have a legal right to kill yourself. So I think it was it the Jews that said it was self-murder? I think it's a good way to think of it. So, all right, right to life. Yeah, it's something you have from God. The government can't just arbitrarily take it from you. You violate the law, you can get executed. You try to kill somebody else, they can defend themselves. You're forfeiting your right to life at that point, but you have this thing from God. All right, the next one, right to liberty. And this is my simple idea of what this means. The right to do what is needed to protect and preserve your life. The right to do what is needed to protect and preserve your life. Don't think here of just, the right to be completely free and do anything you want. Not complete license to sin and that type of thing, but liberty to work where you want to save your money, to spend your money, to plant crops in your yard, or collect the old bottle caps off the glass balls and cover your entire car with them. There used to be a car in Michigan City that they had done that. The entire exterior was covered with those. Somehow that preserved his life, I'm sure. So, all right, right to liberty. And then the last one, you might be able to guess here, the pursuit of happiness. And here, don't think of just some light thing of do things that'll make you happy. Really, by this, something along this line would be a better way to think of it. The right the right to use your property in the way that would preserve and protect your life the best. Okay, all of that is in this bundle of natural law. These are things that ways were created by God. Let me read you a quick quote here. This is from Blackstone in his commentaries on the laws of England. They were very common books at the time, not quite as common as Story's book, that comes later, but very common books at the time. A lot of the lawyers of the day, they would read this, and Adam Smith and a couple other books, and that pretty much was their college education as far as law is concerned. All right, here's what he says. And these, talking about the great natural rights, may be reduced to three principal or primary articles. The right of personal security, the right of personal liberty, and the right of private property. You can see there the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness he describes as private property. Because as there is no other known method of compulsion or abridging man's natural free will, but by an infringement or diminution of one or other of these important rights, the preservation of these inviolate must justly be said to include the preservation of our civil immunities in their largest and most extensive senses. So he's saying, if we have a government that's going to protect these three areas, it's going to take care of a whole swath of other things. If we take away, I don't know, what right can we take away? your right to use electronic devices or something. That's going to infringe upon one of those three areas, the free use of your private property or something. There's lots of other things the government can take away that will infringe on these, and if we can protect these, then the cascade effect will protect all the others. So anyway, I mentioned before with the Declaration, this 3-point summary was used by lots of people to summarize these rights from God. So, okay, natural law. Questions about that? Should I ask some questions about that? All right, let's go on. Two more things to look at here is in the background of the Constitution as far as the colonial time frame, or the time frame in America. We'll look at the state governments briefly, and then look at the Articles of Confederation. State governments and the Articles of Confederation. Okay, just a couple of general statements about the state governments. The first one is, in 76 and 77, the states all adopted new state constitutions. Why did they have to do that? Didn't they already have existing government structures to govern the state? Was it just the rage at the time? Let's all write new constitutions? Mm-hmm. You know, hacky sacks, Cabbage Patch Kids. What's a new one? Bell-bottom jeans. I guess it is coming back. Why 76 to 77? Why do we see them all writing new ones there?
I guess they wanted to throw off any remnants of the constitutions that they might have had set up.
Okay, and more than that, the charters they had from the king no longer applied. They were saying, we're not part of your realm anymore, we're free. So there were no government structures. Well, they had this document that described how it used to be, but there was no government structure. So they had to write these new state constitutions following the Declaration of Independence. So we have a wave of these people writing constitutions here following the Declaration of Independence. Just two general statements about how these things work for the most part. Typically bicameral legislatures. We talked about the colonies and how they are all bicameral except for Pennsylvania. These state constitutions set up the similar bicameral legislatures. And they also established weak governors, or maybe weak by the standard of the colonial governors that could arbitrarily dismiss the legislature and that type of thing. The governors were weaker than the colonial governors. And we're not going to go into the details about those. If you ever have trouble sleeping and pull out the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut and read that. And if that doesn't work, pull out the state constitution that you live in and try to read that. The Indiana's is 60 or 70 pages long, which is very, very painful. We don't have an Indiana State Constitution class, and I'm glad. So they really have to deal with a whole lot of more technicalities. They have to figure out what's a county and how does the county government work, how many people in one area do you have to have for it to be considered a town as opposed to a city. There's a whole lot of details that have to be written out in those state constitutions. So it will fix your problems with sleeping. And if that doesn't work, everybody knows the ultimate thing to put you to sleep. No.
Patriots history is a
That hurts. That's a great book. Oh, nobody knows. Read your Bible. That was a joke. There were some guys in the dorm when I was there that they would have devotions for amazing amounts of time without moving. So they claim they were reading the Bible the whole time. So anyway, it might still have that effect. Does it still happen? So, all right. So how do we get to that? State governments. We have a wave of all these governments writing new constitutions, and they do tend to be much longer and much more intricate than the federal constitution. So, all right. Last thing here for this this part of our background is the Articles of Confederation. Well, depending on how you look on it, you can include the next part in this too. But anyway, next thing, however you want to organize it. The Articles of Confederation. All right, these were adopted in 1781. We have the Declaration in 76. 4 years later, we have this thing. This Articles of Confederation was the first attempt to create a national government. Again, there wasn't one other than the king, some national government structure. You can kind of look at the Continental Congress during the war as this structure, but that was very weak. This was an attempt to create some sort of central government for all of the colonies. It described itself as a firm league of friendship amongst the different states now, and set up what's called a confederacy. Not a conspiracy, a confederacy. Anybody know what a confederacy is? It's what the South had.
Unity between the people, or?
No, I'm talking about government structures. Just kind of a vague, just a very broad description.
A group of entities that are still independent, but they agree to work together to do.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good description. It's a structure where the central government is weaker than the state governments, or the second level of governments are more powerful than the top layer. So here, this confederacy set up a system where the central government, the national government, was weaker than the state governments. They went too far with this thing. They'd come from a position where the king and parliament were trying to just ram things down their throat and claiming they had an absolute right from God to do it. So they went from that to this confederacy, and it really was, we're going to look at reasons why this was too weak. It was an overcorrection, and very quickly they realized that they had swung this thing too far. And we get the Constitution out of that quick shift. But very quickly they realized this was too weak. So anyway, a confederacy, the central government was weaker than the state governments. All right, let me give you a listing here of some of the weaknesses that were in here, things that made this system of government under the Articles really not practical to run any government structure of any size. All right, the first one, 9 states had to approve a measure before it became law. 9 out of 13. We vote completely different in Congress now that they vote by individuals, and you need a certain number of individuals to approve it, and each state can send a certain number of people. But here the voting was done by state. So each state would cast one vote, and it'd get 9 out of 13. All right, anybody know what percentage is needed now to pass a piece of legislation? Don't worry about overriding the veto and that kind of stuff if you know that, just the basic passing of legislation. More than 50%. Yeah, you have to get more than 50%. And it passes. 9 out of 13 is more than 50%, significantly higher. So, and you might think, oh, what's the big deal? That's not that hard. It really is. It makes it significantly more difficult to pass something. So it was very difficult to get anything through, any laws passed. They did pass a couple of things that actually had some long-term significance. They get reauthorized under the Constitution, but very little gets passed here. All right, so 9 out of 13. If you need to put a description, it made it hard to pass laws. Too hard. I mean, we want it to be difficult. We don't want something to wake up and someone fed them some bad meat the night before, so they make a law the next day. We want there to be some deliberation and some time to think about these things, but this went overboard. All right, another weakness is there's no executive branch. Now, if you know what that is, you might be thinking, wow, that'd be a blessing. And you might be right in this particular case. What's the executive branch? It's the person that executes the laws. There's some laws that we need to execute. So it's the president. There was no president, or the governor of a state, or you could think of the mayor of a city. No executive, or a business has a chief executive officer, the one man who's responsible to make the machinery run. The board members can say, oh, we want to paint all of our buildings across America pink. And the CEO says, okay, I guess I'm going to hire some painters. And he actually makes it happen. The legislative body makes rules and decisions. The chief executive carries it out. There was no chief executive. There was no executive branch, no president here. There was they did form a committee of Congress that was I think they just called it the Executive Committee. And it was kind of supposed to do this type of thing. But it didn't work. All right, it would not work at all. So no executive, nobody there to make sure laws are passed. I mean, think of dorm life without Mr. Schrock. Some of you are thinking, wow, all my stuff would get stolen. And others are thinking, wow, I would steal everybody else's stuff. so no executive. Josh is which one would Robert do? Would he be the thief or the victim? All right, that's those quiet people you got to worry about. All right, so no executive. There's also no judicial branch. If you're familiar with the 3 branches of government, we just eliminated 2 of them. No executive, no judicial branch. No court system. Now, there were courts. There were state courts. But there was no national judicial system. Which sometimes is an aggravation because we get rules from the Supreme Court, the national system, that are crazy. But there does need to be, even though ours is flawed and makes some dumb decisions, there does need to be some court that can make the decision for everybody. What they really did was each state, their highest court became the Supreme Court. And you'd have 13 different rulings on everything that came down the line. And it lent itself to a lot of confusion. Right, so there was no judicial branch at all. So there was, if you read it, they did have. I'm not advocating reading it, but if you ever put that after the Bible, maybe into things that put you to sleep. They do talk about setting up a judicial committee so that some judicial questions could come to that committee to get answered, but there was no court system like we would think of it. So, all right, so no executive, no judicial, 9 out of 13. They also had no power to tax, and that really the document says they do, but the practical end of how the thing operated was that they couldn't. They could literally make suggestions about how much states should contribute. But without an executive branch to enforce it, or any court systems to, there was no enforcement mechanism. It'd be like the business office sending you bills that just said, if you'd like to, it would help us tremendously if you paid this amount of money. Some of you are thinking, I would still pay it out of love for God. The cash flow would be very weak, right? And they had the same problem. They could, and they did, tell the states how much they needed to run the national government, and the states did what they wanted. They had no way to back it up. So it does talk about them having the power to tax, but there was no teeth to it at all. So no power to tax in the end. So, all right, 2 more. They couldn't raise an army except by requesting troops from the states. There were no national troops. If they need military forces, they can go to Virginia and ask for theirs, and Maryland and ask for theirs. No national troops. Which there is danger there. And we talked to some of the documents from England, the king not being able to maintain an army in time of peace without the permission of Parliament. There's some dangers to allowing the chief executive to have a large military body that's under his exclusive control. I mean, hopefully you can think, well, that might not be good. There are some dangers there. So here they went overboard, and they stripped it completely away. In the Constitution, there is a national military, but there's some safeguards and some checks in there so that the president can't just arbitrarily do anything.
Like the states have ever had their own form of money and all of that stuff too? Were they their own?
Oh yeah, at this point.
Is this treated like their own country, basically in the sense?
In a lot of ways, yes. At this point, they're much too independent at this point. So, all right, last one. No control over interstate commerce, trading between states. They had no ability to control that at all. Now, this power has been abused today, but it's a legitimate need. The states were taxing each other. There's a couple examples that are kind of funny of states getting these trade wars. One was, I think it's New Jersey and New York. The farmers in New Jersey wanted to take crops into New York, and them squabbling back and forth about how much the farmers had to pay to bring their food in. And, it doesn't. It doesn't make for good friends when you get into those types of fights. We're supposed to be one country. And Congress and the national government had no way at all to influence what that was. Now it's thrown completely to the control of Congress, this control over interstate commerce, so the taxing and that type of thing. Okay, so too weak is the point. It made it cumbersome. It'd be like Mr. Armacost coming to, who did I want to pick on? Christina, and saying, you're responsible to make sure that there's no dandelions in the grass anywhere at Fairhaven. And he gives you a little pint-sized mist bottle with some weed killer in it and says, here you go, good luck. There's no way she could get the job accomplished. All right? And that's really what we're asking of this government structure of the articles. It's just there's no way that they could accomplish the job that needed to be done. Okay? So not that they were inefficient or wicked people, just that they're put in an impossible position. And they realized it very, very quickly. It was 81 that we get this document, us being governed under this document. Does anybody know when the Constitution goes into effect? It's in American history on the timeline.
81?
What's that?
81?
No, this was 81. No. Too much sleeping? 89. Okay. So a very short amount of time. It was the convention is in 87, and it was a couple years before that people started calling for this thing. So it was within a couple of years that they realized this isn't going to work, and they very quickly pushed for the Constitution. So. Okay, I can't tell if you have a question. Your hands. Okay, no question. All right, next thing, we have the Articles of Confederation. Next thing we have is the critical period and the Constitution. Let's see if we can't, this is a relatively short section. Let's see if we can finish this. The next thing after this will be actually introducing the Constitution and how it's organized and some things in it. So it'll be a convenient breaking point. The critical period in the Constitution. First of all, the term critical period applies to the years that we were governed by the Articles. So it'd be 81 to 89. That's referred to as the critical period. To go back to our Christina analogy, you know, the summer that she was supposed to kill the weeds would be the summer that was, you know, we would all be hoping and praying that it was a very low dandelion crop that year. So, you know, we'd be on pins and needles not knowing what would happen. And that's what happened here. From 81 to 89 was that critical period where if there had been too much of a major hiccup or some serious international crisis, the government would not have been in a position to handle it. So a very, very touchy time frame. I've got very generically here 3 different areas of problems we were facing and this government structure that was not able to adequately answer them. And I'm just going to give you just kind of 3 very broad categories of problems. The first one here, this is under the critical period. The first one is we face a lot of foreign problems. Can anybody think why, especially here as we're just starting as a country, would there be some significant foreign questions to answer? Maybe?
Maybe they wouldn't recognize us as independent.
Yeah, other countries not recognizing us as independent from England. Okay.
England still may be a little angry.
England might be a little angry with us, yeah. So, countries not letting their ships into their ports, refusing to allow our ambassadors to come. There's just a whole host of things as you set up this foreign affairs operation that have to be answered, and we had a government structure that couldn't adequately do it. And the people on the other side knew. All right, it'd be like Mr. Schrock being gone for a month and not getting a sub, and you guys knowing that nobody's coming. Okay, Mr. Armacost can post all the rules he wants. You can say, you know, and do what you want. And foreign countries knew that, so it was very easy for them to just slough us off.
Was this also the time that we were dealing with a lot of piracy?
We did at this time. That comes up later under the Constitution. It's just the medieval torture chamber upstairs. Don't listen. All right, so foreign affairs. There's a whole host of foreign difficulties like that, and we didn't have a government structure that could handle it. There wasn't a president. I mean, there was this whole body of Congress, and you know, it wasn't working. All right, another area of concern was domestically. There was a whole host of problems stemming out of the war, stemming out of the state governments being reconstituted, or the colonial governments being reconstituted as state governments, and property that's claimed by 2 states, and there's just a whole host of things like that. Soldiers that fought in the war not getting paid, a whole host of things along that line. And then the third one, it kind of is a similar vein, a whole lot of economic problems. This government structure had to somehow pay its debts. They needed a building to meet in. They needed to pay members of Congress for doing their jobs. We should do that today. Only pay them when they do their jobs. They wouldn't get paid much. But a whole host of economic problems. Just all the, if you can imagine being thrown on your own into the world and having to establish yourself, you know, place to live, down payments to the utility companies, furniture, appliances, you know, all that stuff you got to come up with somehow. And we can't all steal them from Robert. We got to go someplace else. So, okay, so the point here, we were facing a lot of problems, and you can kind of artificially split them up into these categories. A lot of problems, and the government structure was not adequate to handle them. So, okay, so those things made this period so critical. We have these problems and this weak government structure. The next thing here, still with the critical period in the Constitution, the second point is the Constitution. We'll talk a little bit here about the process of the thing getting written and ratified. All right, the delegates met in Philadelphia in 1787. There were delegates from all the different states. They had elections in those states and sent delegates to this convention. They start on May the 25th, and they meet through the summer, and it's September the 13th of that year that this thing gets tied up and sent back to the states for approval. So all through the summer, these guys meet there. Yeah.
So that was basically, I guess, the time they're there nonstop for that? Or they're going
pretty much. I mean, they would meet daily and have sessions and go home. I'm sure they took breaks, but they were there pretty much nonstop. Especially, they couldn't just fly home for the weekend, so they were there. All right, so this group of people meeting is referred to as the Constitutional Convention. A total of 55 men are there. Not all of them there the whole time, but 55 men. And they are a very, very talented and capable group of people. They were very well educated, and many of them were very experienced. We mentioned before about some of the things they learned under the colonial time frame. Many of these men had helped write their state constitutions. They had helped run the colonial government structure, the legislatures and things, when they were trying to fend off the encroachments of the king. So these people had been there, they'd helped write their state constitutions, and now they were writing this one. So there's a very, not only well-educated, but very, very experienced and capable group of people. Some very famous men were there. Anybody know the guy who was in charge? No. He's the father of our country.
James Madison?
No, he is the father of the Constitution. No. George Washington. George Washington was in charge of this thing. He doesn't speak hardly at all if you read through the records of this. James Madison speaks a lot. Other people speak a lot. But it's a collection of the most eminent of the founding fathers we can think of. And it was a very, very special group of people. So, all right, so they meet all through that summer. At the end, September of that year, they approved this thing. 39 of the people actually signed it. Some of them were gone. Some of the people that were there disagreed with it, thought it was too strong. There was an anti-federalist party or anti-federalist movement, people that were against the Constitution, trying to prevent it from being ratified. So some of the men didn't sign it, but 39 people signed it, and then they send it back to the states. Now, we're still, at this point, under the Articles. Ooh, I missed one significant point. Sorry. These delegates that came, they came originally to amend the Articles of Confederation. Everybody knew that they were flawed and had to get fixed. So the original intent was to come and fix the Articles. And they didn't even try that. They said it's not impossible. It's not possible. We need to just make a new document. So that much was a little bit of a step of faith on their part, because there was nothing to say that the states would even go along with this. So rather than amend the Articles, they come up with a brand new document, the Constitution. So that new document then, once they sign it, it doesn't become law. it has to be approved by the states. And the Articles of Confederation said 9 out of 13 states had to approve something for it to become law. So that was the arrangement in the Constitution. 9 states had to agree to this thing, and at that point it would go into effect for those 9. Okay? If you're wondering, all of them eventually agreed to it and take part. But officially, only 9 had to do it. So they send it back to the states. September the 13th of 87 is when they are finished. And then the states begin having these conventions. They would choose delegates, and the delegates would go and vote, and they'd vote up or down whether or not they like this Constitution. You get to read some of the writings that were produced out of that. Anybody know what document that is? I mean, book, not really, document. Somebody's saying it. Federalist Papers. Those were written trying to convince people to approve the Constitution. They were arguing the case for the Constitution, written by Madison and people who wrote the Constitution. So, all right, so that was, I got to finish up here. Sent to the states, they began having these conventions, and it's easy to say, well, of course, everybody voted for it, but it was not obvious at the time. There were some heated debates and arguments, and that's why people like Madison wrote the Federalist Papers and other things, trying to let people know what was in it, trying to make the case for it. So, it becomes, we operate officially under this thing in January of '89. Is when that happens. There were actually 9 states about the middle of '88 that had approved it. The others join in before it actually goes into operation. I need to mention one state in particular. Virginia was one of the slower ones to ratify it. Virginia was a major state. It really wouldn't have been possible to have the government without Virginia in the middle. But in Virginia, the Baptists in Virginia were against the thing unless there was some sort of Bill of Rights included. So they met with Madison. The particular guy's name was John Leland. He was the leader of the Baptists there for the most part. He met with Madison, and Madison promised that if Leland could get the Baptists to side with the Constitution, he would push for this Bill of Rights to be added. And here we have a politician who actually kept his word. The Baptists agreed to support the Constitution. Virginia ratifies it. And then once we're operating under the Constitution, Madison pushes the Bill of Rights. And the Bill of Rights we have today came out of that, the ratification in Virginia. So, all right. Questions on any of that? Next time we'll have another glorious quiz and begin to think about the Constitution directly.